In November 2012, Xi Jinping took over as the Chinese Communist Party's General Secretary, and by March 2013, he began his presidency. Since then, China has pursued significant military modernization. Under Xi, China has also expanded its air force, navy, and nuclear capabilities. However, despite these advancements, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has faced several setbacks under Xi's leadership, revealing that China's military might is not as formidable as it seems. That's where this list comes in. We've compiled 10 of the top Chinese military humiliations that have occurred under either President Xi's reign or just prior to it. Some of these humiliations tickle the funny bone, showing a complete lack of understanding of how to operate weaponry and equipment within the PLA. Others, including the first humiliation on our list, are indicative of deep-rooted problems within China's military that will only damage the PLA should it ever find itself at war. With that, the first humiliation is a big one: water inside Chinese missile fuel tanks. On January 8, 2024, Newsweek cited a Bloomberg report from 2 days prior that suggested that Chinese officials had taken to filling rockets with water instead of rocket fuel. That claim came from a US intelligence report that also found that several of the missile silos China had built in the country's west had non-functioning lids. In other words, they couldn't open to allow missiles to fly out should China ever need to strike a target. The outlet noted that corruption within China's rocket force was to blame for these incidents, and that corruption is so deep-rooted, according to an anonymous Newsweek source, that it may have led to President Xi reconsidering any military action he may have intended to take in the coming years. It's also telling that Xi had conducted a purge of the PLA before the news of the water being in China's missiles broke, with that purge leading to him ousting 9 PLA officers from China's National People's Congress. Later, he would also get rid of Wang Xiaojun, who he appointed a year prior to lead the China Academy of Launch Vehicle Technology, or CULT. According to CNN, the CULT is China's largest base dedicated to the testing and production of both launch vehicles and missiles, with Wang having spent nearly 3 decades working for the organization before finding himself on the chopping block. Now, it's worth mentioning that Newsweek was unable to verify the claims of water in China's missiles when it released the report. Several outlets also claim the reports were fake, including the Asia Times, which notes that missiles are generally kept empty until they're ready to launch. But whether the reports are true or not, they gave the PLA a double black eye. Not only did the reports highlight that China's rocket force, which is estimated to control between 2,300 and 2,400 ballistic missiles, may not be as effective as appeared, but also that China's military structure is prone to corruption. Next up, an incident that could be classed as funny if it wasn't so dangerous: playing hot potato with a live grenade. In January 2012, The Atlantic reported on a video that showed 6 Chinese soldiers standing in a circle. They're throwing something that appears to be smoking between them, with nearly half a dozen passes being completed before the package is thrown into the center of the circle. Then the Chinese soldiers jump away as far as they can, with a small explosion following the jump. There's a certain logic to this exercise. It's important for soldiers to understand how much or how little time they have between pulling the pin on a grenade to when it explodes. However, having soldiers throw a live grenade among themselves when even the smallest of slips could lead to an unneeded death is far from the most efficient way to teach that lesson. You would think a prop grenade would be a better choice, one that could still showcase the time the soldier has to throw without being capable of killing that soldier while they're training. Incredibly, China appeared to be proud of this exercise. It broadcast the display on state television, with The Atlantic later discovering that it was part of a demonstration put on by the PLA for dignitaries that included soldiers jumping through literal rings of fire. Perhaps impressive as a stunt show, but a humiliation for a country that was trying to showcase its burgeoning military might. Put it like this: hot potato isn't a form of training in the US military. From that potential explosive humiliation, we move on to something that put a far more serious stain on the PLA's reputation with the rest of the world: Chinese peacekeepers abandoning their posts in South Sudan. We should note at this point that for all of China's recent military modernization, the PLA has yet to be put to the test in a full engagement with an enemy. The closest we have to seeing what China's soldiers can do comes from their work as part of United Nations or UN's peacekeeping missions, to which China dedicated 2,227 troops in 2023. Dedicating this many troops to the UN is admirable on the surface, though it's likely part of China's wider plan to showcase itself as a deliverer of peace to the rest of the world. Regardless of the intentions behind China's work with the UN, we should at least be able to trust that the soldiers it sends to crisis zones are capable of doing the job. That assumption takes us to South Sudan in 2016. Working as UN peacekeepers, a contingent of Chinese soldiers found themselves stationed in the South Sudanese capital of Juba when members of the Sudan People's Liberation Army clashed with supporters of Sudanese politician Riek Machar. These clashes led to a host of street battles, with fighting becoming so intense that it involved both gunfire and artillery rounds. 2 UN bases were hit during these attacks, which killed a pair of Chinese peacekeepers. What was the collective response of China's soldiers? Abandon their posts. The Guardian reports that Chinese troops simply stopped any attempts to complete their mission, abandoning their posts within the UN bases so thoroughly that they even left weapons and ammunition behind for the Sudanese fighters to take. By the end of the fighting, 300 people had died, and a compound inside Juba had been attacked by up to 100 South Sudanese government soldiers who reportedly raped 5 international aid workers while assaulting at least a dozen more. The UN base that the Chinese soldiers abandoned was less than a mile away from the compound when all of this was happening. The incident was extremely humiliating for China, which issued a response to the abandonment accusations by claiming that its soldiers had never left their posts, labeling the accusations as malicious speculation. In October 2016, a Chinese Ministry of Defense spokesman named Yang Yuzhen claimed that Chinese peacekeeping forces carried out the instructions of the UN mission in a responsible manner and did its utmost to guarantee the safety of civilians and other peacekeepers. Reports that followed the incident, including a detailed recapping of events by the Center for Civilians in Conflict, says that isn't the case. China's soldiers, who by 2016 were supposed to be part of one of the world's largest and strongest militaries, turned and ran. Cowardice in the face of conflict, the last image that China wanted to project when trying to convince the rest of the world of the strength of its military. Sadly, the 300 people who died during this incident serve as a constant reminder of China's failure in South Sudan. The incident also demonstrated that there is no substitute for real combat experience. China's soldiers simply didn't know how to react when they came under fire. Still, it's not just failures in conflict that have humiliated China. Even the traps it tries to spring on other countries have become sources of failure for the PLA. In October 2023, several UK-based media outlets, including the Metro and the Daily Mail, reported on leaked files that suggested that a Chinese submarine got caught in a trap in the Yellow Sea, also known as the North Sea, that was intended to catch US or UK subsurface ships. According to the Metro, the report says that an incident occurred at 8:12, resulting in the death of 55 crew members, 22 officers, 7 officer cadets, 9 petty officers, and 17 sailors. Apparently, the Chinese submarine became entangled in a chain and anchor obstacle China itself had installed, leading to a full systems failure. That failure took 6 hours to repair. Chain and anchor traps are often used to protect sensitive or strategic locations such as shipping lanes and ports. It's believed this trap was intended to catch spy submarine operations off the coast of Shandong, which is a Chinese province with a population of 9 million people. At their worst, chain and anchor traps will not only ensnare a submarine, potentially for several days, but can even pull the sub to the seabed. The Chinese submarine crew was eventually able to escape the trap, but by the time they had repaired and surfaced the submarine, the vessel's oxygen system had been contaminated, resulting in the Chinese sailors being poisoned by the very air they were breathing. China, of course, denied that such an incident had taken place, even though the report named the vessel that was caught in the trap as PLA Navy Submarine 093417. Speaking to the Daily Mail, a British submariner claimed that it was plausible that such a trap existed and that a Chinese vessel could get caught in, before adding, "I doubt the Chinese would have asked for international support for obvious reasons. Those reasons would be twofold. First, requesting aid would have revealed that China is laying traps in waters that it doesn't fully control. The Yellow Sea sits between mainland China and the Korean Peninsula and has served as the location of peace zones between North and South Korea since the end of 2018. In other words, it's not a place where China should be laying traps." The second and more embarrassing reason is also the most obvious one. Doing so would have humiliated China because it would have to admit that its submarine had been caught in a trap the country created itself. That could highlight a lack of communication between the various departments of the PLA, as well as showcase how China's submarines aren't as technologically advanced as Beijing would have the rest of the world believe. The submariner who spoke to the Daily Mail highlights this by saying, "The Royal Navy has a kit which absorbs CO2 and generates oxygen in such a situation. It's probable that other nations do not have this kind of tech." In other words, for all of China's modernization, it's still not equipping its submarines with fail-safes to keep their crews safe when primary systems fail. That lack of equipment, combined with the massive blunder of getting caught in their own trap, resulted in the deaths of 55 PLA personnel. This is far from the only incident that's seen Chinese soldiers put themselves in danger using their own weapons. Thankfully for the PLA, this next incident didn't end in any deaths, though it very easily could have. After all, butterfingers are the last things you would want when training with live grenades. In December 2011, footage emerged of a Chinese training exercise in which a recruit was being taught how to pull the pin and then throw a grenade. There were no circles or games of hot potato involved this time. That would have been catastrophic, with the soldier instead being positioned within a practice bunker as he prepared the grenade in front of a drill instructor. Pulling the pin goes well enough, and the soldier winds back to throw the explosive over the wall in front of him. He winds back, throws his arm forward, and then suddenly realizes the grenade is no longer in his hand. Instead, he lost his grip on it as his arm propelled forward, leading to the grenade bouncing off his body and into the wall directly ahead. The drill sergeant reacted quickly, pulling the dumbfounded cadet into cover as the grenade exploded mere feet away from them. It's difficult to see why the recruit would have messed up the throw so badly, though it may have something to do with the technique he'd been taught. The video shows the soldier holding the grenade in front of himself with both arms outstretched before he winds as far back as possible to throw. The motion is so dramatically overemphasized that the soldier may have lost focus during it, leading to the Butterfingers flub. Whatever the case may be, the PLA was very lucky not to have a recruit who'd blown himself to pieces in the aftermath. It also couldn't hide away from the humiliation the video caused. It was viewed by over 200,000 people on YouTube and broadcast by several TV stations in China. What an explosive humiliation. But at least this incident only involved a grenade. In June 2024, a much bigger catastrophe could have occurred when a Chinese rocket launched itself. On June 30th, a Tianlong-3 rocket, owned by Beijing Tianbing Technology Company, also known as Space Pioneer, was undergoing basic testing while docked on a launch pad. Something went wrong. The company would only call it a structural failure, and the rocket suddenly detached from the pad. Flying wonkily through the air for 0.93 miles, it crashed in the hilly region of Gongyi, which is located in central China. Fortunately for the PLA and the Chinese space program, the unintended rocket launch didn't cause any casualties, though it did lead to a fire. The rocket's various components also ended up spread within what Space Pioneer called a designated safe area, with the fire it created being put out by the Gongyi Emergency Management Bureau. Tianlong-3 is an interesting rocket in its own right. Space Pioneer claims that it's designed to be similar to the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, one of the many examples of China copying from another country's technology, and that it's a two-stage rocket intended to be launched into space. It's also a liquid propellant rocket, similar to the Tianlong-2, which is fueled by a mixture of oxygen and kerosene. The rocket's flaming wreckage was caught on video, broadcast by the BBC, with the incident potentially being much worse. After all, imagine if the rocket had been loaded with a warhead before its accidental launch. Perhaps even more worrying for China is that the Tianlong-3 only managed to travel for a mile before crashing and unleashing an enormous explosion. Either way, it's a very public rocket failure that President Xi would have preferred to stay private. Still, at least this failure was in China and involved a weapon under development. As humiliating as it was, the incident at least didn't leave the PLA with as much egg on its face as when several of its operatives were caught trying to spy on approximately 150 million American citizens. In 2017, 4 Chinese military hackers broke into the Equifax database by exploiting a vulnerability in the credit score provider's online dispute portal. Once in, the hackers managed to steal millions of users' login credentials, essentially giving them, and their government, access to the personal and financial details of 150 million Americans. Names, birth dates, and social security information were all swept up as part of the hack, with the hackers managing to get in and out of Equifax's systems undetected. That's not the embarrassing failure. In fact, if those hackers had remained undetected, China would have been able to claim a huge database coup, albeit one that nobody would know about. Beijing would have been even happier to know about the chaos these hackers had caused, as Equifax was forced to issue public apologies for allowing their systems to be compromised, as well as pay $700 million to federal and state governments, with a further $425 million set aside for customers affected by the breach. No, the humiliation came when the hackers were caught. In February 2010, the US Department of Justice's Office of Public Affairs announced that 4 men had been charged with the hack: Wang Qiang, Liu Lai, Xu Ke, and Wu Zhizhong. All 4 were found to be members of the 54th Research Institute, which is a division of the PLA apparently dedicated to cyber attacks and online espionage. In other words, the PLA was caught illegally hacking into databases owned by American customers, with those who conducted the hack being held up and publicly shamed. The 4 PLA operatives faced a 9-count indictment, which included economic espionage, wire fraud, and computer fraud, in addition to stealing trade secrets from Equifax that they would have accessed as part of breaking into the credit reporting company's databases. China was so close. It had pulled off one of the biggest hacks in American history, only to have the PLA members who conducted the hack caught and shamed. Granted, Beijing got access to millions of people's details, but it also placed the US on alert, which is the exact opposite of what the country wants to achieve when it's engaging in subterfuge. China was caught with its hands in the American cookie jar. But its next humiliation comes far closer to home, crashing one of its own planes. In recent years, the debate about if and when China will invade Taiwan has intensified, with some analysts claiming Beijing will be ready to attempt to annex the island it claims as part of its territory by 2027. Nothing is certain here, though we do know that China constantly runs military exercises in the South China Sea and near the Taiwan Strait in an attempt to intimidate Taiwan. The problem comes when one of the planes being used in those exercises goes crashing into the waters below. That's what happened in March 2022, when Newsweek reported that a PLA Air Force Y-8 anti-submarine warfare aircraft, which patrols waters looking for submarines, experienced some sort of failure in the air and splash-landed in the South China Sea. The news was first broke by Duan Dang, who is a Vietnamese maritime analyst with Taiwan's intelligence agency, confirming the crash a couple of days later. China's defense ministry didn't respond to Newsweek's request for comments, but what they did do was launch a surprise military exercise in the area in which the downed plane fell, which Duan Dang says was a cover for a search and rescue mission designed to find the stricken pilot. The Coast Guard and research ships were only moving slowly within small areas, suggesting they were on a searching mission, claimed Dang. Dozens of other naval ships were also continuously patrolling the area. It got worse for China. Su Tzu-yun, who's an associate fellow with the Institute for National Defense and Security Research, claims that China also grounded every single one of its Y-8 aircraft following the crash. That's standard protocol in China. Its safety standards call for inspections of similar aircraft following a crash, but the fact the fleet was grounded at all basically confirmed what the PLA was trying to hide. Su also speculated that the plane didn't crash due to a mechanical error, as he describes the Y-8 as being a mature, reliable, and durable airframe. Rather, it was either inclement weather or a pilot error that caused the crash, with the latter suggesting that China isn't doing enough to train its pilots for even the most basic of operations. Not the greatest image to project when you're trying to establish your country as one of the world's dominant military powers. And that brings us to our next humiliation: bouncing artillery. In July 2015, Military.com published a short video of Chinese military fails, with one of the funniest being a piece of artillery being transported along a road. Of course, artillery typically weighs thousands of pounds and is supposed to be sturdy and capable of staying in place while rattling off dozens of explosive shells, but the artillery being transported looked anything but stable. In the short clip, a truck is shown towing the artillery over the road, with the artillery unit itself bouncing on its own tires. So not only is the equipment poorly secured, but it ends up looking like it's on hydraulics. The humiliation is made even worse as the event was filmed by some people traveling in a car past the artillery and truck. The only noise heard in the background are chuckles from inside the car, hardly the most threatening image in the world for a piece of equipment that's supposed to pose a threat to other nations. And so we come to our final Chinese military humiliation, a humiliation that is far more serious than some bouncing artillery or a few funny videos of the country's soldiers failing to toss grenades properly. This final humiliation is one that's endemic in the PLA and threatens to destroy the image of China as a global power. The CCP is riddled with corruption. In June 2024, The Guardian published a piece in which it examined the disappearances of Wei Feng and Li Shangfu, both former Chinese defense ministers. Both were expelled from the CCP for what China's state media calls serious violations of party disciplines and the law, with accusations against the pair including accepting bribes and gifts that could influence their decision-making, resulting in them facilitating improper benefits for others. Wei was the former leader of China's rocket force, which you may remember from the waterlogged missile humiliation that kicked off the video. His removal capped a complete reshuffle of that division following the missile expose, a clear sign that President Xi is unhappy with the people leading what is supposed to be the most powerful and sensitive arms of China's military. As for Li, he was sacked as defense minister in October 2023, having served in the role for just 7 months. That sacking came after Li had failed to appear in public for 2 months, with his June 2024 expulsion being the seeming end of his story. That was humiliating for China both because of Li's short tenure and because he was seen as playing a key role in helping China rebuild its relationship with the US. For all of the military failures we've covered in this video, this deep-seated corruption within the CCP may be the most important. It exposed President Xi's approach of giving high-ranking military positions to people who have either never served in the military or, if they have, offer no direct combat experience. That's a recipe for corruption, as these officials are more concerned with lining their own pockets than preparing China for war, a situation that may come back to bite the PLA if it ever finds itself in conflict. With that, we end our video of the top 10 Chinese military humiliations. Do you think there are any we missed? What do these humiliations, almost all of which happened under Xi Jinping at a time when China is supposedly modernizing, mean for the PLA? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out 10 reasons why China's military is weaker than you think, or click this other video instead.